everyone, I'm Sarah Christensen with One Sage's View Astrology, and welcome back. We are diving into the astrology of Nicola Coughlan and Luke Newton for the Bridgerton series, and we're focusing on the promo tour. So we're going to look at what the astrology looked like when they were in Australia. That was in April. And so we're going to look at the astrology to kind of understand kind of the energies that were in Australia, because that is the beginning kind of the international tour, and kind of where there was a little bit more, I don't know if it was shock, but it was, wow, they're holding hands. So what does that mean? And that kind of like, caught people's attention. I don't think they were doing so much of that in earlier promo in London when they did the live, even though there is some interesting interactions and behaviors when they're sitting on the couch in the live that was done in London. That was before this. And of course, there's interactions around Valentine's Day and those ones. But this is when it's really kicking off in the international tour. And they start, having to fly great distances to do the promo tour. So this is going to be an interesting dive, because I'm also interested that they were looking at their astrology from what we know from the BuzzFeed interview that was done in Toronto, I'm always making sure to say that correctly, in Toronto, that Nicola pointed out when they were interviewed. So I find it interesting to kind of look at what's the astrology of the moment during those few days. Where's the moon in transit during those few days? Because I don't have like an exact time pointing out the launch per se, but I'm looking at like a noon chart for April 21st. That's where I'm primarily focusing, but I know that they are there until we know that they were in the airport on April 24th. So that's when they leave. So there's kind of like a timing of when the transit of the moon during that period of time. Okay. I'm looking for major connections of the planets in transit to their charts. There's very interesting videos of what we observed after the fact of the interactions between Luke with Nicola and Nicola with Luke. So there was a lot that went down in Australia when they were there. And so it's exciting to kind of explore that and how that energy starts building towards kind of that peaking moment in Rio de Janeiro. And we've already covered Rio in the last two videos. So this is going to focus on Australia, building energy. So we'll go through the Australia energy of the astrology, and then we'll, in the next couple of videos, go over Italy and what was in the two locations. They were in Milan, Italy, and also Verona, Italy. And then I also want to take a look at Toronto. I think that's important. And I'll also take a look at Galway, because and Dublin and Galway, because that was, kind of Nicola going homeward bound. And I want to look at those as well, because that was right before the premiere event in London, which I've already done those videos. So we are a few more videos out. So it'll probably take me about 3-4 weeks to kind of finish off the series, I think, from the season 3 focus that I was going to take a look at. And of course, I still want to do my swan video. So that's going to be in my next few videos. And then I have some other things planned for like the Netflix, kind of understanding the success of Netflix with Bridgerton specifically. And then I have a couple other videos that will start a new playlist I'm focusing on analyzing Luke Newton and other people. And also, so other videos that I will do in that kind of bridge off and just start looking at chart analysis. I will also be adding on a series around just simple, basic, essential astrology, very short videos. I am creating a little bit of a mini course for people if they want to dive into that a little bit more than just the videos that I do. So anyway, I hope that this is fun for you. I know there has been so much has been going on in the fandom. I have been paying attention on the periphery through TikTok lives and things like that. I'm just curious to kind of just take a temperature check. I don't spend too much time on it, because I think what's going on from my personal point of view and keeping it at a distance, is it's a long cycle to observe Nick and Luke as it pertains to what might be a potential. Okay. There is a window of about 4 years. So kind of like being on the edge of your seat day in, day out right now doesn't seem very healthy to me. That's just my 2 cents. I think it's more important to kind of look at, they're going to be going back to work for 2 years, like definitely in filming for the next 2 seasons. We know that they're going to be in season 4 and season 5. And there could be extensions beyond that based on the importance of both of their roles in the storyline. So if we get to continue past season 5 for Bridgerton, which I definitely think will be the case because of how much it brings in viewership for Netflix, I don't think it's going away until they finish off the whole series. And they may have other productions that come out as side storylines as well because it's so successful. So I think it's important to kind of keep this in a long view, like 3, 4, 5 years view, okay? And then how much is really going to be visible? I think it will be visible at some point in the future, but I'm also of the thought that I think it's I don't know, maybe it's the younger generation that just loves to dive in and be detectives. There's something in the consciousness that loves the quest, loves the hunt for identifying something of truth. Is that true or whatnot? There is a bit of an obsessive quality to it. And I equal that to the Pluto generation with Pluto in Scorpio generation. Pluto in Scorpio is like a massive detective in terms of deep diving and looking for the BS in any situation. So, it's in the astrology, which I find interesting. And it's probably why Taylor Swift is so darn successful with all the little Easter eggs or all the little clues that she leaves and how far out she can plan for something. I think that just is so enticing for that generation. Okay. The generation that has Pluto in Libra is all fascinated the scope of relationships, the variables of relationship. And so you have the obsessive detective generation wanting to know and doesn't want to deal with bullshit, or maybe they want to play in it. There's both sides, right? But there's also the quality of those who are obsessed about what's the difference of the relationship here and what's the truth of that, and exploring that Pluto in Libra generation. And I'll talk about like when those years are, but if you know your astrology chart, you kind of know where your Pluto is, right? And I'm Gen X. So Gen X is, we're the latchkey kids. So we like to entertain ourselves with stuff as well. But Pluto in Virgo is more about looking at things from transformation through, it's kind of like the transformation through humility, like finding where our soul is learning about humbleness and those kinds of things and transforming things. And because it's in Virgo, we might do a lot of cleanup work. So there's that. But there is that sense, okay? Pluto in Leo generation has a very different quality, very, very different quality. It is more about the kings and queens, Leo needs to be seen, needs to be adored. There we can go on a whole nother tangent about, Pluto in Leo. Every generation has something that is transforming collectively for our collective consciousness. So I don't want to speak negatively about, we all have positive and negative in every single aspect of life. So that's just duality in this third dimensional perspective. So I hope you're enjoying this. I think it's fun to explore the themes. I'm still working on a deep dive into more about Psyche and Eros, and I finished the book that I've been reading, and it's almost like I have to go back and reread sections that's very complex, and so I want to try to pull out some essential things from that book, and also what I'm lining up with this pull and magnetism into this relationship that we are observing at a distance, but feel the magnetic attraction to them. And I'm still fascinated by that. And my hunch continues that they are catalysts as a combination. I think it's lining up that they are catalysts for something about the continual growth and emergence of the feminine. And so there's the patriarchy that's, if you don't know much about the patriarchy, I can go into that later, but it's extensive, and the mindset and the consciousness that we all live in. Feminine energy has been suppressed for centuries and centuries. So it's the re-emergence of that and then trying to balance it out. So, we may learn about those awakening to understanding, what has been occurring with that and the energies around that and how damaging it's been to everyone, really, because even, men who desire to have a partner in balance, they struggle to understand their role with this emerging, or they could have a struggle in understanding themselves and the roles that we play in this emerging the feminine energy. And it's for everyone, because it's also the man or heterosexual man learning about what toxic masculinity is, and also learning about, well, what does that mean to be at balance with my feminine energy within myself, and then how I operate in a relationship with a female, right? So a woman in our life. So that's important to kind of keep in mind. This is all emerging, and we're all kind of struggling along the path of figuring that out. There are people a little further on the path who've done some inner work, who understand what the shadow material is, and working to heal those things and operating on a little bit higher perspective. And we can continue to grow that and, shed that past of when the feminine was suppressed. Okay. But we're continuing to break through that. It is very much in our collective around the world, not just in the United States or North America, but this is around the world. So no matter where you live, this is a constant around the planet. Okay. And it's so big that it's almost like another whole series in itself. So I'm not going to dive into much of that. So I want to enjoy just going into the Bridgerton promo tour and exploring what the energies and the astrology give us, and understanding the situation for these two individuals, because we are so attracted to them ourselves. So let's go. Let's see what it has to say. All right, we are jumping into Australia and looking at the astrology for Australia. So we know that they went to Bowral. I hope I'm saying that correct. And I just did a noon chart, April 21st. I kind of want to look at what we have in terms of the rising sign and the moon and these kinds of things. So we have the rising sign in Cancer that it emphasizes emotion and sensitivity to emotions and feelings. The feelings are accentuated, and we have a lot of energy that's in addition to that in water. So we have like a complementary to the Pisces energy. And so that kind of is setting the tone a bit from a noon chart perspective. But okay, so let's look at, we also have the sun is at 1 Taurus. The midheaven on noon of that day, April 21st, is at 2. So the sun is right on the midheaven. That's accentuating sensuality, the sexiness of what they're wearing, the fashion that they're wearing, and how everything has been beautified. So all the flowers, all of that decoration, and, creating that a feel for the Regency through all the decorations that they had around the park and the places that they went. So for all the images that they were going to be doing as well. And flowers were definitely a theme in one of the interviews when they made those flower wreaths. We have that. Also, we have this emerging, this was the moment that Jupiter and Uranus are starting a new synodic cycle. This is one of the biggest events of 2024. Is this moment. So what I love is that they're starting the international part of that tour, and also start a lot of people talking and wondering about them holding hands and the sensuality. And they're alluding to, because no one's seen season 3 yet. This is all kind of the promo, getting everybody excited about it. I believe when they had the launch party in Australia, which is interesting that they were in Bowral and not in some other major city. I think it was on purpose to do that in a small town city so that they could decorate, and that they also didn't have, I guess, just had the opportunity to do more with keeping it secret a little bit, I guess, because that's a whole like 3.5 weeks or so, 4 weeks before the very first launch of season 3, part 1 on May 16th. So I think it's interesting that they were, for Australia in the small town. So, but this is such a major event for 2024, in addition to the solar eclipse that happened on April 8th. So we have these major energies that are being amplified. And Bridgerton season 3, about the lovers, about the friends to lovers theme, is accentuated, and the sensuality is accentuated. And what Nicola herself did to create, and Luke Newton to create some of those sensual scenes, sexy scenes, and how high romance, that's very Taurus as well. I think it's so interesting how much passion and interest has been, and the magnetism. The magnetism has been so significant for this season 3, that Jupiter and Uranus is just like a rocket ship as it pertains to that theme. It just explodes into extensive reach for people's interest and passion for it. Also, it's starting a new synodic cycle. And so that when you start a new cycle, it's like the old cycle is going away, and there's something that kind of embodies this Taurus energy and its excitement and all of the things. And I think the Jupiter and the Uranus completely depict how major the consciousness was, the sensuality was exaggerated and emphasized for part 1, especially to the carriage scene. And so I think that's almost like the reaction videos that hit social media, and they were about the most interesting scene I can imagine. It goes beyond the mirror scene to me in a way, because it was still so innocent and all of the things that were in that scene. And it was like a peaking moment before part 2 and before everything that was happening on the launch in London that happened that evening. So this is that peaking moment to that carriage scene from part 1. I think that is such a collective thing. It kind of is like a seed of potential from the Jupiter and the Uranus, and it's almost like it got embodied there. And there's other themes and places in life, but from a collective, when you look at something, it's like, well, yeah, that really did pick up in a huge way. And now it's even showing in other entertainment. If anyone follows Emily in Paris, they had so many references back to the Bridgerton and the carriage, and they were blending some worlds between the carriage scene and the future coming masquerade ball. So I thought that was interesting that what they did for that, or the Emily in Paris season. But so to me, that was like, did the writers pick that up and exchange notes and how did that get picked up? Because I know it takes a long time to complete the production for Bridgerton because of the CGI that's used after all the scenes are filmed. So, and all the editing what goes on in editing and sound, right? So yeah, I just think that part 1 really is like embodies that sensuality of Taurus. So that's interesting. And it's in the 11th house of collective consciousness too. I look at 11th house as like group consciousness. So from this kind of beginning and a very general chart for Australia, that's stunning, right? Also, I think because of the recent total solar eclipse that was just a couple of weeks before this, there's the node, and that is right near, and then there's Venus. This is what's interesting as well. Venus is sitting on the location at 19 degrees of the total solar eclipse. Mercury is involved, and it's got a retrograde. It's retrograde. So that to me tells me that there's going to be something that's revisited. And like this is Mercury in the underworld. Mercury, so when we say underworld, it's almost like the consciousness goes into a place of transformation, okay? And each individual has that somewhere in their chart. So for Australia, it's at the top of the chart, at the noon hour anyway. We could dial in, did they start the event for the launch when she's in the black dress and he's in Versace of some sort. I can't, with the jacket, they look stunning. But what's important is that Mercury is retrograde. So to me, there's something that's going to be revisited. There's something that's not visible, and it won't be visible till later. And it's Mercury in Aries. So it's kind of like our instincts, how we communicate quickly and maybe abruptly. But it's also the perception of something it's like you don't have all the pieces to understand the whole picture. Isn't that great, right? So Mercury in Aries is, very interesting to consider as a part of that whole tour, because it's starting, the international part of it anyway, is starting with a Mercury in retrograde. And to me, when we get to the London premiere and all that Gemini, that tells me like you didn't see this behind the scenes. So many people didn't, right? But I think it's actually also instincts, because Aries is instincts. You have to be brave, you have to have great courage. But so in part, I think with Mercury in Aries, but going into the place of kind of being hidden, it's their communication that is so subtle that is going to show up, and it's going to be talked about and spoken about, and then it's going to have a big question mark on it, because like, well, how we saw this, and then this is what's going on. Otherwise, what? So there's that whole big question mark of like, what's the truth? But when you observe the instinctual nature of someone, you're observing the deeper truth, right? Because how professionals who observe body language, actual language that you use, eye contact, when you touch your face or these kinds of things, they all have messages. And, unless you are I guess if you have psychotic, is that the right word? If you have that potential where you can lie so exactly, if you can exact a lie where you do not give away such things, that would be someone who is really dialed in from the psychology of something, so they could, like a master con, right? You have to think of someone who is a master, is a master at the con, but most people aren't. Right? Now, actors have a great quality in being able to act out emotions and these kinds of things, but they still have their style. They still have their way that they smile. That is still them, right? That bleeds through. But their job is to act out, creating the backstory and all the things that are in a character and bringing it to the moment of a particular scene and making us drop the illusion, or drop in to have this illusion created for us to be entertained by something, right? So their task is to create all this image for us to step into that illusion. And so it's just the task, I think, is Nicola calls it suspend reality. So you are invited into the illusion, right? And so that takes practice in being an excellent actor to be like, oh my gosh, that was so good. It made me, I didn't even see the individual actor as themselves. I just saw this character. So I think that's incredibly interesting what acting can do in terms of that and how we engage with that as art. Right. So it evokes emotions and it helps us think about things in complex ways. And it's part of our way to understand ourselves as being human beings. Right. So Mercury in Aries retrograde is such a fascinating planetary position, and it's so close to the place of the total solar eclipse. So there's a lot going on with the energy already because of the total solar eclipse and what it will give us in time, because eclipses are, active, I think, for at least a year. Sometimes people say, oh, for two weeks, 3 weeks before and several weeks after. And of course, all of these things do line up to that in terms of what happened with the promo all the way to London, right? But I think I've experienced a solar eclipse so near in my 5th house in Leo back in, I think it was in 2016, 17. And then I had a car wreck 1 year later from the same day of the solar eclipse 1 year later. And that was the only thing in the astrology that made sense of what was activated in that. So that to me was like, oh, okay, the astrology is speaking to me in this moment for me to pay attention to something, right? So yeah, eclipses are so unpredictable in a lot of ways because there is a bit of chaos. There's so much chaos because the eclipsing of the sun when you're in a total solar eclipse is so powerful. So there's that, and is part of, this is what's so fascinating, is how potent it is on Nicola as well, because she's in a lunar node return. She's in a return of her lunar node back into Aries on the North Node. So we'll discuss that when we get to her chart, but I also think that's interesting. But wow, so interesting that Venus is at 19 degrees. And that to me is so interesting as it relates to Luke and his progress chart, because I have discussed this in his other videos when I was just looking at his information about the progressed Venus for him, and the progressed Venus sitting at 19 degrees in his progressed chart. So he has, like, it's really emphasized kind of the fallout that he will experience because of that kind of eclipsing on the progressed chart of his Venus. And here it is in Australia. I think wow, that's pretty stunning. What else? Oh, when they arrive in the first day of Australia, we have the moon in Virgo at 29 degrees, which is interesting. And right opposite, wow, that's powerful, to have the Neptune, transiting Neptune opposite the moon on that first day. And to me, that's the power of illusion. Okay, so you have the details, all the details that go into creating the image. So that's the expertise that's done in terms of all the decoration, all the planning. And this is like, the moment is like, here we go. And that's a Virgo 29. That's a critical degree. So there'll be a sensitivity to the details that is, happening in Australia, but also it will have an illusion to it. There's a fog to it. There's that activity has the impact of a Neptune in Pisces, which is the romance, the escapism, the illusion, but then it's also delusion. That can happen over time. But this is in Australia and pretty significant, right? However, you got Mars right next to it, which accentuates the feelings and the sensual a bit, because Mars in Pisces it's in a water sign. So Mars is our passion. So when it's in Pisces, it's about the illusion that's being created. So the activities that have been done are taking place. And we also have Saturn. So the energy in Australia has this kind of a little bit difficult combination between Mars, the passion part, Saturn, boundaries are a blur, and you have Neptune, great illusion is being created. Right? So the photography is, so much accentuating some kind of illusion that's being created, right? Ninth house, that's also kind of in the foreign place. The illusion is being created, so that's there. I think Jess, the showrunner, was with them in Australia. I don't know who else was in Australia, but I know she was. So that's kind of like she's a Saturn figure as it pertains to the show, because she is the boss of the show, for the showrunner. So she's there. And also another thing that I want to point out, which is all those things are accentuating, like that Neptune and that Mars are at a sextile to the Jupiter and the Uranus and Taurus, because it's a 60 degree. And so what a sextile does is those planets can communicate, because they can see each other in the position in the heavens, and that gives like extra energy to it. And so no, Neptune is the most powerful of all of those, because of it's the most at a distance to planet Earth, right? Outside of Pluto. Pluto is even greater. So the further away the planet is and the slower moving that it is, the more power it has in the chart. So the power of the illusion, the power of what is being created is quite substantial. And then there's the, how much excitement and energy and extra lift it will have around sensuality, the beauty, the goddess, these kinds of themes that we have seen projected onto Nicola, and the sensuality of the body also Nicola, and how Luke, or even Colin, his character, is part of that emphasis, right? Nobody has seen the show that the season 3 at this point, but they're going to get they're one of the first to get episode 1 of that part 1, right? So they consider what happens in episode 1 of season 3. So these are all on deck for Bowral, Australia. We also have Chiron in here, which is it's part of the equation of what might emerge around. Think of all the wallflowers that are part of the fandom, and what Penelope stands for, and what Nicola has put into the character of Penelope as a wallflower, and her coming into her own, and how she's it's kind of like us getting a fast version of self-actualization. Goodness, it's hard to say. So self-actualization for her character Penelope, and what Nicola puts into that, right? So that's all kind of in here too, because a Chiron in Aries is about the right to exist as you are, and actually having visibility to that. So think of the wallflowers and the lack of visibility, and then what Penelope is emerging from that in this season 3, right? And what that means, and to represent so many millions who love this show. So I think that is really powerful and important. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit here in terms of Chiron, Venus. I'm still so fascinated by that Venus position as they start in Australia. I did not clue that in before, but wow, that's really, really significant. And it's really significant for Luke, like a double, quadruple connection for Luke, because Venus is so important because Venus is the ruler of the sign of Taurus. And so that's so fascinating that in Australia, she's, Venus is sitting at the position 19 degrees of Aries, which is the degree of the total solar eclipse. And think of all of the tarot readings that brought up the total solar eclipse in their readings in June, or when they were doing those readings in the beginning, and how significant it is. And I am still thinking that it's not just that it is this extra energy about Venus in Aries is like the feminine going and getting what it wants. So it's operating counterintuitive to feminine. It's acting in a Mars way, okay? Mars is in a sensitive Pisces sign, so it's an accentuation of the feeling. It's like almost it's like there's an undercurrent of anger and frustration when Mars is in Pisces. I have a Mars in Pisces. I know Mars and Pisces very well. So Mars and Pisces, but you also have Saturn and Pisces. It's kind of adding to the restriction of the emotion, the restriction of parts of the imagination, or how do you operate with boundaries within. It's very, very challenging to put boundaries when you're dealing with water signs, especially Pisces. And, this is important to kind of point out, but there's frustrations that are as an undercurrent here. And that's important to point out as well. Now, that's just the general energy. We'll have to look at it where it pertains to each of them in their charts in just a minute. But I wanted to point that out because I think this is so important about the position that Venus is in when they're in Australia, being at that really significant degree. Because not only is it, Venus is responsible for Taurus, but Venus is also responsible for the rulership of Libra. And that is Nicola's south node and the sign of Luke's Jupiter. Jupiter is the expansive planet for us when we're developing in our life, and it's like a benefic, so it's like accentuating support. Okay, but there's something about this being so important relating to the past life stuff. So it's kind of got the seed of the potential for not just the filming that they've done for the show in 22 and 23, but here when they're starting the promo tour, and Australia is like the launch of that when they go through all the cities, right? Even though they did some promo in February and I think earlier in April in London, I think it was significant when they started traveling, right? So to have the emphasis of the Venus in Australia at the point, it's almost like a rebirth of that past life storyline, a rebirth of the past life storyline. But there's something that can be renewed, and because the Venus is completely getting eclipsed, it's in the position of what it was to be eclipsed, but it's eclipsed on another level for Luke, but it's an eclipse on Nicola's trajectory life arc. So there is something profound about this in the whole scheme of things, and so that's incredibly fascinating to me because we dove in on them as individuals and their charts and the importance of that 19 degrees Aries, and also I think Nicola's north node and its position, and the Mercury is right on that, right? So everything is getting activated for you get to review something, you get to go back and check this out. Right? Oh, why? Okay. So I think that's important. That's in the seed of this moment, like when you are in Australia. So I think we're going to have some fun looking at how it is for them individually. So let's go to their individual charts and see what that looks like. So here we go. Okay, so here is the detail for Australia, April 21st. This is the noon chart, and we are looking at Nicola's chart in connection to that. So Nicola's on the interior here, and on the exterior is the planets in transit in that moment for Nicola while she is in Australia. So it starts off with what I love is to see that moon again, emphasizing Libra. That moon in Libra is kind, friendly, but it's bringing up the past. It's activating the past, and it's going to move over it while they're there. So it's activating it. Okay, so it activates that at a distance. It's activating the Aries. Everything in Aries is getting activated by that moon coming across, and so it's going to cross over the nodes, and then Mercury, and then Chiron, and then Venus, and so forth. Okay, so yeah, this might be a little bit different of a time. It might be by an hour. Yeah, it looks like it's an hour difference. But in terms of everything else that's hitting Nicola's chart, here is the Jupiter and the Uranus recently having passed her moon, which is accentuating her feeling nature, that's the groundedness of Nicola. So it's activating body image and these kinds of things, her own body. But this is like home. So the fact that they ended up in Galway as a part of this tour is very significant for Nicola, and that it's emphasizing something about relationships when they're traveling. Ninth house for Nicola is traveling. Higher education or astrology is also ninth house. Again, there's two parts of astrology. I see astrology both in eighth house and ninth house. Ninth house for the higher education of it and the divination of it. But what is hidden and the mysteries is like the eighth house. Okay, it's like the occult is eighth house stuff. I also think to me, this is an activating period of time. So it's really emphasizing, okay, Nicola, we're going to bring something from the past forward for you to see again. And you don't have all the bits and pieces. You're going to have to act on instinct. That's the Mercury. And you don't have all the pieces, but you're acting on instinct. The instincts of their behaviors will be visible to us. And then that's what's going to be talked about, But it's setting up something also. And I think hopefully that has been understood through these videos that I've been doing, is that these events were like almost destiny for them both to take the evolutionary path. They're catalysts for each other and the potential to re-engage a relationship. Okay. Now, does it mean that they are endgame? It is possible that they do, but it's also possible that they got enough in the lesson and then they can choose another partner, right? That's why I said in another video that I still give it 50-50 chance that they will be endgame in terms of having a long-term relationship beyond friendship, right? Like maybe committing into more romantic connection. Of course, the souls have to choose that as the part of their free will. And it doesn't mean that it's just, happily ever after. Most relationships, it's like you still have to work at it. You still have the lessons, but you may find your joy easier with a good partner. But you will still face challenges with partners that you're working out through end of life, right? Love is like that. Unconditional love is you still work on the things, and you can be presented with new challenges, right? And they both as individuals were presented with a huge challenge in terms of dealing with collective energy coming at them in a unbelievable tidal wave of energy. And the tidal wave to me is the Neptune in Pisces and the leaks and the passion that people have about them as two individuals. What's the possibility of coming together? Now, Nicola, this North Node right here is so important because the Mercury is sitting right on that North Node. It's activating her whole trajectory of life. So by doing the work that she's done, that is Capricorn is the work that you've done, but it's her career. Her career house is emphasized by Pluto in the 10th from a whole sign perspective. She's got Pluto in Scorpio. So that's her revealing, sexy, sensuality and, being a part of the perfect breast community club or whatever. That's so fun how she's stated that during the promo tour. But I think that's important because you see, here's the Scorpio in her 10th house. But her midheaven, the midheaven gives you another clue about the public persona. Her public persona also has Sagittarius attached to it. So it's how she is working with the collective group. Her friends and her allies are very important for her public image and her public persona. She has a little bit of a wild card because she has Uranus in Sagittarius. So when she's traveling, it can be a wild card. And she has that Venus in Aries, which is also trine to her own Mars. So her feminine and her masculine are both in fire signs. Okay, so she is a powerful presence when she's showing up. And because you have both feminine and masculine coming out in external, that's the fire energy. Now she is she calls herself an introvert because of that energy, and her sun in the 12th house. She, need to go behind the doors and be in solitude for a bit. And that's how she works on her craft, like how she creates her characters before she it gets to final, that they're in recording production, So in Australia, there are some key things happening that are kind of bringing everything forward, but that past life stuff is also your personal evolutionary path is right there. It's embedded in it, right? So not only is the moon reminding like, okay, we're going back in time, we're going to be looking at this thing from the past, but it's also like your perception of it is instinctual. Other people's perception, how you communicate is instinctual. It's going to show up, and there's also a trajectory going on, but there's also kind of a little bit of wounding that is still present in the seed of everything about the feminine having to be out there in a way that's more, her showing up to, she has the Mars in Aries, so she communicates in a more direct way and has the wit that is faster. And, how she communicates with the interviewers is actually, she was put out there to do that. So it's not, but it's also maybe being sensitive to the wallflowers who are the fans, because that's a Venus in Aries as well with the Chiron right next to it. That's important to kind of point out. Okay. So she's aware of that in her perception. Okay. And how she might communicate things and articulate things. Also, this huge ball of energy, water-wise feeling, imagination in Pisces is being activated by Neptune, really activating it, and the surrendering, the emphasis of that. The music, I also think of music and what we might get from a production like this, but there are certain pieces of music that we hear and we know Bridgerton, right? So there's some of that, but it's just activating the Jupiter and Eros in her chart, and also Psyche opposite, and also Black Moon, Lilith Moon, the transit there. All of this is a lot of activity in Pisces, and Mars can be challenging in, the feelings of how we might get frustrated or what we're communicating. Is it coming across right, or is there a bit of an illusion wrapped around it? Saturn is more of having some restrictions put on, and the restrictions can be like what you can say, what you cannot say, how you feel about something. This is like to me, the Saturn in Pisces is the mastery that went into the imagination of it all. That's a part of that. And then the values. This is the self-confidence. So we have an image that's being created for us, but what's going on inside their inner world when they're standing in front of that much press, right? And so this is like the kickoff. So I think, and it's activating Eros, and Eros is the passion, and it's the beginning of that huge pickup. I was kind of wondering about when the live happened. I wasn't on deck kind of following along at that point to that degree. I didn't catch up until I was going to watch it. I watched it as soon as it dropped on that midnight in May. So in terms of what was the promo happening before that, I wasn't caught up in that per se, but just a little bit in terms of and I'm not always on TikTok, but I saw a few things on TikTok, but not a lot. I didn't jump into it till later in terms of why is this picking up continuously? It continues to pick up. And then it's like, wow, this is fascinating. And that's the Pisces, right? Like how much it floods the consciousness of feeling and the imagination. It captures the imagination. And then it's the escapism. There is a lot of, when you think of Pisces, I also think of, can also be like too much substance, but that depends on, when that's a part of the equation if someone's doing, but we collectively, when we binge watch something, that's very much a Pisces thing. It's like when we go and binge a whole thing in one sitting, we never used to consume media like that, but now we do. Netflix is operating in terms of splitting it in two parts. It also frustrates people. And so that's going to be communicated, but it's kind of the escapism. And so there's a lot, it's good to have some escapism in life. That's the whole point of having stories and imagination, is to have a place to kind of learn in another way, or be, when you get captured by art, in a way that moves you and inspires you to act or something like that, or think about something in a completely different way than you would have ever otherwise done. So the Pisces is it's super powerful. And the Saturn is approaching the Eros. It's applying to it. Mars has already made the conjunctions with Eros and Jupiter. And so it's more that Saturn is applying. So that means Saturn is actually continuing to apply a challenging situation about containing the feelings. So I think that's really important because of what's transpiring during this promo tour. I also think that we look at this kind of important combination of the Jupiter with Uranus, which is the planet of expansion, the planet of exaggeration and growth. Whatever Jupiter is doing is implied through Pisces, because Jupiter is the ruling planet of Pisces. Okay, so when Jupiter is getting accentuated by Uranus, chaos, liberation, something is opening up around body, around our perception of sensuality and the right of a woman's sensuality, because the Bridgerton series is about the female gaze, right? And it's okay for the woman to have pleasure. I mean, the whole season 3 is about Penelope growing into that and understanding pleasure, right? So, and the role that Eros plays in that, okay? And then we can go into the Psyche Eros myth later, but it's very important because this is about the feminine emerging. The female, like in Nicola or Penelope, if we want to take it from her character's perspective, is the feminine being allowed to be fully expressed, not suppressed. Now, isn't that a paradox for having a show set in the Regency era? I mean, it's like counterintuitive, right? But I love what Nicola Coughlan says. It's like, well, if you can, get into the, glittery eyeshadow that they present in the Bridgerton series, then you can get into the, looking at it from a different point of view. We're fascinated, I think, collectively about the Regency era and what were the rules and these kinds of things. But the way that Bridgerton is, they're breaking the rules all over the place. I mean, that show is fascinating, and it's using contemporary music put into a new composition with the parts of the orchestra, right? So I love that. It's a new way to look at story, right, and characters. So yeah, the Pisces energy is quite fascinating, the Eros being activated, but it's Jupiter having a new synodic cycle. That's a term, that's an astrology term. It's basically when two planets start a new cycle together, it sets the tone for something to emerge. And when it's related to Uranus and Taurus is a new definition of body image, pleasure, sensuality, these kinds of themes. And it's absolutely happening for Nicola in her whole root of her chart. So this is, and it's sitting on also applying to her lot of fortune. So this power of fortune, lot of fortune, that's like a point of fate. You're fated for this, Miss Nicola, because it ties into something that you are working on from the past and themes of your own Venus, these things. And that also sets the energy for all the tidal wave, the feeling, all of that. I still think that by playing the role of Penelope was such a key for Nicola in unlocking some storylines for her own personal evolution of her soul. And it's almost like it was fated to get the role. Same thing for Luke. They had to play these parts because there was such a, it's possible they could have met on a different stage or something like that as well, but it's in a bigger stage with Bridgerton. But I think there's maybe because of the volume and the timing of their season, they got flipped, man. It was they were book 4, and then to have them in season 3, to me, that's all divine timing. Like that was part of some other higher choice. So because the astrology lines up on so many levels and for so many things, it's stunning. But yeah, so the new synodic cycle between Jupiter and Uranus is so important for understanding the whole picture of everything, and how that Jupiter having a more chaotic, liberating her self-worth and confidence in a whole nother tier is a part of this starting off. So that's awesome to explore that. What else is really key here? Jupiter is also responsible for the rulership of Sagittarius, because Jupiter traditionally rules both Pisces and Sag. So Sagittarius is a huge amount of energy within Nicola's chart because it's her midheaven, that's her angle. Now, her angle, her midheaven could move slightly, but if it's moved, it's more likely that it's deeper into the Sagittarius, but I still think it's right near there. But her Saturn, which is a key planet, is for her, and also Luke, because they're connected through that's her Saturn and his vertex and his North Node. So that right there. And wow, when they're in Australia, the Lot of Fortune is also activating right there. It's still fascinating how fated it all seems. It's like fate and destiny intertwined. Yeah, because to me, fate is like there are certain things that are going to happen and you don't have control over them. And that's definitely the case of how things just completely go tidal wave like, and for the fans and how much it gets picked up. Destiny is what you do with it. To me, destiny is, okay, you've risen to this thing through different points of free will being active by other people, and then you land into something. But then destiny is then what do you do with it now? I mean, one point of thing I think is important to point out that was a free will choice by Nicola. It was to wear the pin through all the promo tour for something that she believes in about helping others in time of need in terms of Gaza. So I think that's her showing how she operates on her destiny. Okay. Another destiny point of view would be looking at every choice that's made during the promo tour actively. That's part of destiny. Like, how do you shape it? Right. So strategically holding hands shapes that destiny, right? Fate is more that moments that are going to happen even through all the choices that you made, that they're just dialed in because it's a part of a bigger thing that's happening for other outside forces making choices, and you're in the mix. Okay, that's how I look at fate and destiny. My perspective on it, others may have a completely different view of fate and destiny, but I think destiny has more of like how you shape something once you're in that energy. Okay. And the Lot of Fortune to me is more fated. There's another thing called Lot of Spirit, which is in traditional astrology, which I don't pull up here. It's another chart that we pull. And the Lot of Spirit is more of your public persona, your professional career, and how you navigate and what energies are available over the time period of your career and how you direct it. Like, what are the energies archetypally that in what direction you're going to go and what themes they take, right? And we could do a whole other case study on that for Nicola and even for Luke, but what I need is more exact time. So I would have to do a rectification of their charts to get a more exact birth time. Okay, right now we're operating on a 0 degrees of Aquarius for Nicola. And Pluto by transit is sitting right there. So it could be that she's like a 1 or 2 degrees of Aquarius. And so to me, that Pluto is the transformation of how she will share herself with the world. She's gone through massive transformation as Pluto went through all of that Capricorn. And right now in September, I'm recording this on September, what is today? It's Friday. It's September 6th, I think. Yeah. And the Pluto has by retrograde moved back at 29 degrees Capricorn. So it's kind of right across the line there and finishing off Capricorn. And she doesn't have anything like at 29 degrees per se. So to me, it's more something that's in the unconscious mind that might have an activation of sorts, but from the energy of Capricorn, of how she might structure something, how she might create a new milestone for herself, those kinds of things. But she's going back to revisit the role of Penelope here in 10 days. She'll be on set that Monday. Possibly she'll be on set that Monday. Depends on if they start off with a big scene where everybody's coming in at the same time. So I'm not sure what they are planning for that, but I can't wait to see what happens when they actually do launch and what videos may come out from the launch day, right? Of beginning the production. I should clarify, beginning the production of season 4. I also think that in Australia, we have all of that energy of Pisces is just to back this up a little bit to just get a clear view here. I've discussed the moon, and while they are in Australia, that moon will cover that much ground, I believe, because they're there for the 21st to the 24th. They get to the airport on the 24th, I believe. And that, the moon covers about 13 degrees a day, right? So it's kind of like they're traveling again at the beginning, when it's in Sagittarius and they're on a long haul. It's a long ways to Australia. So that moon going what's interesting is I think in Rio de Janeiro also, this is very interesting, the moon was in Libra and then going into Scorpio. And here we have another moment of Libra into Scorpio. So this was the first one in terms of the chronological order, is the Libra moon when they first arrive, and then how it then transitions into Scorpio. And that is such a strong change of energy for the moon in terms of it's very friendly and open and social when it's in Libra, and how that activates her South Node and Luke's Jupiter. So it's activating the relationship and the past parts of the relationship. It brings it forward. And then the moon goes into Scorpio. And so while it's in Scorpio, it's intensifying Luke's fixation, and the moon is activating her career chart, or her career house, 10th house from a whole sign house perspective. So the Scorpio, so it goes over her Pluto in Scorpio. The moon will transit that. So there's transformation that's happening. Then the moon in Scorpio will then be opposite her moon when it's in transit through that Scorpio up here in her 10th house. So when it transfers from Libra to Scorpio, it also will square her ascendant and the other person that's significant to her, which in this case, when she's traveling on a promotor, is Luke, because we're always fascinated by the two together. And then we have the sun at that moment when they're starting at the beginning of Taurus. It's kind of emphasizing Taurus, and in the midheavens on the sun. So there's extra energy on Taurus in the moment on April 21st. So that to me is fascinating. Then they take off again when that moon is in Sagittarius. It could have moved all the way to Capricorn, but it's likely that it's in Sag when they leave. But I'll have to look deeper at the ephemeris for April 24th. I don't think I have my ephemeris. I always leave my ephemeris in my living room when I come on to record, but oh well. But that's important to point out, like the change of energy, because when the moon is in Scorpio, it has an intensity to it. It's more, it wants to pull back a bit in terms of being a little bit more reserved. Scorpio moon is like, I'm checking the energy, and it has a sensuality. There's a sexuality to Scorpio, sensuality to it, because it's in the same perspective of, it's on the same, Taurus and Scorpio have that same, but it's like Taurus is more like trusting, where Scorpio is, I'm a little bit not trusting the thing, where it wants to get in, probing into the psychology of something. So very visible in Nicola's chart, but in Luke's chart, it's on the bottom of his chart because of the flipped perspective of their charts. And that's why the mirroring is so powerful. But also when they flew to Australia, and also this was in Rio de Janeiro, is they go across the equator. So it's almost like there's a flip perspective on there. And so it has a powerful view of being below the equator for what's happening for the conscious, and what they might be activating in their chart. Through location astrology, you can kind of get an awareness of that. And I can share more about that later, but I really think by the location of Australia and Rio de Janeiro being below the equator from them, they're both from the northern hemisphere and they're going to the southern hemisphere. There's something to that in astrology and in the consciousness of placement on Earth, right? And what that emphasizes for them, and then also us observing that. So there's quite the activation. What else do I want to point out? So we're talking about the moon because it is the thing that moves the fastest during the time that they're in Australia, and Mercury is continuing its retrograde. Yeah, it's the next one. It's fast. Yeah. So I think I've covered what I wanted to cover. Oh, the only other thing I wanted to point out also is Ceres is a dwarf planet. It's like Pluto. It's like Pluto's sister. Ceres is equal to like Demeter in the Greek, and Ceres is Roman. When you think of the myth of Demeter and Persephone, and when Demeter goes into the underworld to retrieve Persephone from Hades. And so I look at Ceres as very powerful. It's because it has the power to go toe to toe with Pluto, but there's always, you lose something in the transformation, and the thing that's lost is Persephone has to return to the underworld in that myth for a period of time. And that's kind of equal to, it can translate to like the abundance of when the earth is giving us sustenance of all the things that sustain us and nurture us with the food, agriculture, these kinds of things. That Ceres is just the heart, is the part of the earth like that. And then when Persephone is in the underworld, and Mercury or Hermes with the invisible helmet retrieves helps Demeter retrieve Persephone. And so Mercury is such a key planet in astrology, but it's also key in myth and helping us understand the archetype. When we look at Ceres, and Ceres is in Capricorn, and it's at 19 degrees here when they're in Australia, but I also think it's also there when they are in Rio de Janeiro, if I'm not mistaken. It's very interesting because that is such a key planet, activating her sun, which is her essence of her soul, and then it's activating combination of all this of her lunar nodes, and that's the arc of the life. That's the evolutionary intent of life. And Ceres, as I talked about maybe in another video, is important in terms of the feminine archetype. It is like the negator. It is the root of the feminine. And I will discuss this in another video because I think it's so important. The Ceres at 19 degrees is also squaring off with this part of the chart with Venus there, and the feminine that has to go get, the feminine that's acting in a masculine kind of energy, and the woundingness around that. So there's a Ceres that is like in Capricorn. To me, I think of Capricorn, an image that I have to kind of relay what the Ceres is in Capricorn, or even Venus in Capricorn, but you can use also for Ceres in Capricorn is like a stoic queen, knowing when to reserve the resources so you have what you need in time of need. This is in it's transiting Nicola's 12th house of behind the scenes, and that part of her that is connected to the unconscious. So there's something that's activating her sun, her soul, and with that theme. Her own Ceres, though, is so close, I think, to her midheaven. Again, I don't have exact degree of the midheaven, but I do think it's within that first 10 degrees there. And I think that the Ceres up there in Sagittarius is a part of her life mission, in a part of the whole context of how she shares her values. Her blessings come to her, then she shares something with the world. She activates us in certain ways. And here it is in her 12th house. It's like something else is being activated for her as a soul, and how she may use her ego that she's created in Nicola Coughlan, superstar, and what she will do with it, right? So of course she's going to get other things as the promo tour continues. Like, we become aware of other announcements of her getting certain parts, and that was what she was filming this summer for the magical faraway tree or something like that. That's, she's got the fairy part, but it's also that she got picked up by a higher tier agency, CAA or something. So it's like there's more in that whole trajectory that I was talking about that's kind of also in the seed of what's happening for her in Australia, right? So there's so many layers to things that were in her astrology of that moment. And Luke is a counterpart. He has his own individual soul trajectory as well, and what he's gaining from it. But his is like this, like I said in another video, it's culminating. For Luke, it has to culminate and get to a point. So he has a moment, which is a karmic moment breaking, which I've discussed. We'll look at his chart in just a minute. But I think it's important that we understand that even though we saw all these things in terms of their body language, the subtle energy exchange, but it's also our magnetism connected to being fascinated by them. That's part of the combination of the Jupiter and Taurus and the Uranus and Taurus and all of the energy in Pisces. That's at sextile. It's exciting. It's exciting at all. But it's the feminine, underneath all of that, to me, the Psyche and Eros of this whole thing is, to me, adding to the breakthrough that can happen for feminine energy rising, like releasing the shackles of suppression, right? So it's like having a show like this, but it goes beyond the simple, show. There's all these combinations of divine timing that gives the archetypal image for something to break open like that in such a big way. And that's what caught me. And I was like, whoa, what's going on with this Psyche and Eros, right? And then, understanding that, and then leads me to like dive into it deeper, read more on it. And then, oh, this is a fascinating perspective about the feminine rising, and that's releasing suppression. But when you go to rise, there is often resistance to that, right? So there will be things that happen that show up in the resistance, the criticism that happened on the show towards Nicola body image in the beginning, and maybe even possible the showrunner Jess, maybe in how much the other sensual scenes were, clipped short and things like that. You know what I mean? So how comfortable those in authority for Penelope's season, Colin and Penelope season, and how much coverage, how much was added by all the other storylines in terms of parts. You know what I mean? Like I could get critical on it, but I don't want to get critical on it. I think it's done what it intended to do in terms of the fascination and all of that and the pickup and the potential, but I still think it's in there, right? Because of that Virgo moon when it first launched and how that touches into this part of Nicola's chart, which is what other people value, right? Virgo, discernment versus judgment. And so she probably fascinates more than I'm sure was bombarded through social media and even into the beginnings of her career and what she's faced in that, and then how she stood up for that. And so she's like a change agent as it comes to that suppression of what it means to be beautiful and, breaking through old paradigms. That's Nicola. She's going to do it, right? Quite beautiful. Love it. I love her energy. She's so fascinating to me. Let's see what else. I think I've covered almost all the parts. I talked about Mercury, Chiron, Venus, the sun in that moment. Is that? I don't think I've talked about this part of the chart. This is very interesting to me as well, because this is Juno, the divine, what's like more like the partner, like a divine partner, and it's on the vertex. And that vertex, that's like a faded point. So how her role is for the Bridgerton series and Penelope and her being the partner, that's going to show her trajectory of that character and what goes in that display of her femininity, she's got two parts of personality she has to bring together by the end of that show, and face all the consequences of certain things that she's done. That's being the humility that she brings to it. But it's also Virgo it's almost like also the detox of a certain idea of something. It's also scrubbing on that in a way through her portrayal, the way she's acted, and then how she also carries herself while in the public eye during the tour in terms of, she was very sure of herself, assured, confident, all of that. And, in the Juno, then to have the partner when they're together, you can see that just by them being themselves is actually shedding some of that toxic stuff. You can't help it, right? So I think that's important in the whole equation of everything. It's like, well, you could argue this and criticize that, but in the end, look how much it was streamed. Look how much fascination is happening. Now, some of it is extra, but everybody has to come to their own figuring out how they want to operate when it comes to that stuff in terms of how much extra they go with it. Some people take their criticism, I think, too harshly. I think social media, could be a whole argument on how social media is and our psychology as it pertains to, it's so easy to be critical behind a screen, behind, the keyboard or the phone, whatever. So we have to grow up. We have to mature about how we conduct ourselves even behind the screen. You know what I mean? Like through the keyboard and things like that. But that's something that comes in time, maybe by what happens. And what happens is I think is a scenario that people would be sad. I mean, consider Luke Thompson, and he doesn't have social media. They created one for season 4, and somebody else is probably managing that for him because I'm sure he doesn't want to touch it. I also think Claudia also. So for the next 2 seasons, we will not have that social media that was personal, that came from Luke and that came from Nicola. If you were an early fan that you got, that doesn't exist for Luke Thompson, and it doesn't exist for Claudia either. So it's going to be very, very different energies, right? But I think they will use Nicola and Luke for season 4 promo. I think those Bridgerton Netflix those in authority, some of the things that they've posted is like, come on, wow, it's like they're totally shipping them from Shondaland, right? Like Nick and Luke, not Colin and Penelope. I mean, some of the stuff that they've like shared is like, okay. So I think that it will be interesting to see how partner, her role as partner will be in season 4. I mean, that's going to be so fascinating to see. But by Australia, we're seeing this connection to her vertex of what does it mean to be a partner, and to be a stronger partner is a balanced relationship, has 2 strong individuals. And that means that even though this is all set in the Regency era, she's a better partner because she has a strength to her, and she has spoken up about what it meant to be a woman, and all of the stuff that happens in season 3, and her strength as a partner, and him having to figure out how to be in that partnership and be in love and be a loving partner with that strength of the feminine. I think that's interesting. And if you get into the details of that, that's how powerful those last scenes are for season 3. So that's cool. I like to see that.